April Vokey, and you are listening to Anchored, my chance to speak with some of the most influential people involved in the outdoors today. Join me as I travel to sit face-to-face with my guests in their own homes to learn more about their careers, opinions, history, relationships, and life both indoors and out. This episode is brought to you by Fly Ventures. We're cleaning out our inventory and are taking 25% off all merchandise. Men's and women's clothing, feathers, flies, nothing is off limits. Shopping with American dollars? With your dollar, you can count on yet another 25% off with the Canadian conversion. That's a savings of 50% off. Don't wait. We don't expect items to last long. Just enter code SHOP25 at checkout. Visit www.flygal.ca and click on the shop button. Ian Ricketts is an avid fly fisherman who just happens to be the vice president of Ocean Brands, a Richmond, BC-based marketer of canned wild salmon and tuna. Ocean Brands owns Ocean's Tuna and Goldseal Salmon, two brands many of us have grown up with. In this episode of Anchored, Ian and I discuss the commercial tuna industry, and Ian explains Ocean's strategy and steps towards more responsible practices.
So I was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Oh, you were in the Flatlands.
On this date in 1966.
It's your birthday today?
Yes, it is.
Oh my, happy birthday. And
Thank you.
Oh, that's so embarrassing. This is what the listener doesn't realize. So it's now 7:30 p.m. Right. We're in your office.
Right.
And because I have a flight to catch out tonight.
Right.
And I said, well, because obviously I've got the chintzy mic here with me. I didn't have all my material.
Right.
And I said, well, I can make this meeting work on my way out of town. Ian didn't tell me, everybody, that it's his birthday. Ian, what are you going to... Do you have family at home?
My wife is... my wife, Rita, lovely wife, Rita.
It's starting to really hurt now.
No, we actually decided to exchange having probably a very expensive dinner to having a very nice brunch.
Okay.
So we had a really nice morning together.
Okay.
And I started late.
Well, thank you for spending your birthday with me. And that should speak volumes, because I've had another very passionate conservationist on my show, Bruce Hill. Right. And I also interviewed him on his birthday. So it goes to show that the guys who really care put themselves second. So
it's pretty important. It's pretty important.
Well, let's talk about it. Okay, so you're born in the Flatlands. Happy birthday. Yeah. Born in the Flatlands. What brought you and when did you come to British Columbia?
So in 1972, my dad brought us into BC. He was a miner. He worked underground in Saskatchewan for potash and came west looking for a better life for his family, and we settled in Princeton, BC.
So how old were you then?
6, 7-ish.
Okay, BC is your home.
BC is where I grew up and where it all happened.
Okay, did Dad fish?
Dad taught me to fish. We actually did a little fishing out in Saskatchewan, which I remember. And, he was really patient. Every time I'd lose a spoon and he'd have to stop fishing, he'd come over and do what he had to do. But where we really spent a lot of time fishing was in BC.
What did you take in college?
So my undergraduate is a certificate in executive coaching. It was through Royal Roads University.
What is executive coaching?
Yeah, it's a bit of a fancy term for what it is. But essentially, it's... in management, one of your key objectives is to get results through the organization and through the people you work with. And I reached a point in my career when I was in Kitimat where I actually had to decide I was either going to get out of this or I was going to get better at it.
You were working in Kitimat?
Yeah,
I've definitely done a major jump here because I'm so excited to get to tuna.
I know.
But I can't do that to myself or my listeners. So walk me through this. How did you end up in Kitimat?
Yeah, I'll start kind of at the beginning.
Go for it.
I started in Princeton and, as I said, did a lot of fishing. Got the bug really bad. My dad I'd get him to drop me off when I was about 10 on the highway outside of town on the lakes. And I'd walk the lakes and creeks back and home and meet him at the arena after work, and he'd pick me up. And then, of course, when we'd go camping, we'd do tons of fishing. And while I was out there, fishing the streams in between the lakes. I'd throw, at the time, I was, a little torpedo bobber, red and white, and fly, and sometimes, hopper on the end of a hook, that kind of thing. And I actually one day had a fellow neighbor who was probably 3 or 4 years older than me. His name was Craig, and I met him basically on the Merritt Highway. And we started talking, and he had a different rod in his hand. He had a fly rod.
Ooh, and so it begins.
Right. So the pond where I would normally, throw my little torpedo out there, the brook trout would just scatter when the torpedo hits, because it's, it's 1.5 foot deep water. And then they would slowly come back. They'd see your fly, and you'd catch a trout. And he'd cast out, and his fly would land. The trout would go right to his fly.
Right.
And that was a big moment right there. It was like, that's how I'm going to fish. So I did what I could to get my hands on a fly rod, and knew nothing, obviously, but made it work. Yeah, probably wore my arm out too many times trying to figure out what I was doing. But I really enjoyed it. When I was in high school, I kept fishing right through school. I met my wife there, so I'm still with Rita, who I met in high school, and we managed to stick it out and just finished our 20-year anniversary last week.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. So I was working in high school, I worked for the Overwoody Food Group.
Oh, okay,
Western-based grocery company, and a great company to work for. And I just spent the last 33 years working with them. So they transferred me out to Edmonton just after I got married. Spent a couple years there, and then an opportunity came up to come down and move into Sparwood, right next to Fernie, and started fishing. Actually, I spent more time fishing in Alberta on the Crow's Nest because rainbows, right? Mm-hmm. And so Vic Bergman, the operator of the little fly shop there, Crow's Nest Angler, he got to a point where he just said, I think it was summer 92, he says, Ian, he goes, are you going to fish in BC at all?
Yeah.
Because, I was getting, 150 days in Alberta. I actually hadn't fished much in BC. So I came over after pretty much 1.5 years living in Sparwood, and actually just started getting into the Elk River and some of the great streams down there. And in about a year, I started guiding there.
Was it part-time? Because you're still working at Overweighty at that point.
I was working at Overweighty, but I managed to get a lot of time in the water. And, I think in 92, I had over 100 days by June 1st.
Oh my goodness. And you had a full-time job?
Well, what I did was I used all my holidays, and we had these, extra day in lieus. And my wife was a dental assistant at the time. I'd actually wait till her schedule was written at work, and then I'd write mine so my days off were opposite. And,
of course you did.
And I'd say, oops, there's another day to go fishing.
Why didn't you start thinking about going into the fly fishing industry full-time at that point?
I did think about it. I had a lot of people asking me, at the time, Fernie didn't have a fly shop.
Right.
And there were only 2 guides on the river, myself and another guy out of Fernie who did a lot of gear fishing. So it was really undiscovered, and you had the place to yourself. And I had given it a lot of thought, but I had in my mind I was going to make a career out of what I was doing. And I also knew that in the industry that I'm in, they move you around a lot. And I had planned to go where the fish were. So I made some nice moves after leaving Sparwood Fernie area that took me to some great fishing destinations, which, so...
Within the Overweighty group?
Within the Overweighty Food Group, yeah. So I moved on from Sparwood, and I moved from there up to Kitimat.
Why?
Well, I was moving on in my career, and the opportunity came up, and I knew there'd be good fishing up there.
Okay. But this is again with Overweighty.
I stayed with Overweighty for 33 years.
That's amazing that they went to so many excellent destinations. They must have gone to a bunch of destinations, and you just handpicked the fishing ones.
I got asked to go to some of the right ones, and I don't know if they knew how much I loved fishing, but I was very careful in where I went for the most part.
Right.
And so I spent, I think, the better part of 5 or 6 years in Kitimat, and of course, it's a great river, a little different, winter run, steelhead. I caught my first steelhead when I was in Kitimat.
Oh, great, okay.
So some good time in Kitimat. From Kitimat, I went down to Squamish.
Oh, another great spot.
So Squamish was, I think, about a 3-year stay, and I think I got the most that I could out of that. From Squamish, I went to Kimberley. The Kimberley stay was really short, and then I was invited to go up and be the general manager for Bulkley Valley Wholesale and Smithers.
No way.
Yes.
That is so funny. I do all my shopping there.
Right. So we did some great work there. We introduced all of the local stuff that you see in there today.
Yeah, that's why I shop there.
Right. So everything from Meg Hobson's cookies to,
Rudolph's sausage.
Yeah. All that. We did all that.
Cool.
Yeah, it was I was going to university the second time then. I was getting my master's in business. And what was wonderful is that I had Bulkley Valley as a learning lab. I could go back and I could play. It's a great success story. And the support of the local growers and producers is the cornerstone of the success of that business.
Now, you said you lived there for 6 years.
I was there for 7 years.
Why did you get sucked away? I've never met anybody who managed to get sucked away from Smithers.
From Smithers, yeah. Well, that's a great question. You know what it came down to was I have 2 boys. They're now 18 and 21, and I wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to get an education, and I wanted them to be able to stay at home. I also had my parents getting older, and it was important that I was in a place that I could easily get to my parents if they needed my support. And the same for my wife Rita, for her mom. And my dad's in Princeton still. Rita's mom is in Penticton, and I had lost my mom actually shortly after I came back, which allowed me a bunch of trips out to see her a lot easier than I would have had at Smithers. So, the way I've always looked at it is, I can go back at the best time of the year. Bill Birkeland is a fisherman at a Kitimat, and he's an old fellow, and him and his wife traveled around in fifth wheel, and they were on the best river at the best time of the year, and then they move on. And that's sort of the way I look at it, and I can go back.
Yeah, you can.
And I know where to go. I know where to fish. I know what time of the year to go.
And if you're there for the fishing and not the berries and the foraging or the mushrooms and stuff, then it's really not that long of a season.
It's a short season.
Yeah.
That's right. So it was a really good time to move down. Difficult. Very difficult to leave, 5 acres in the country, with kids and dirt bikes and, all that stuff, and come back down to
reality.
Reality, yeah. Right? but you gotta make decisions in life, and I have no regrets. No, I've never looked back on any one of these moves.
I could understand that makes sense, especially when you hit me with the aging parents. I understand. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, how on earth did we end up here in Richmond at the Oceans brand factory?
Right.
Or this is the head office?
Yeah, so this is the office for Ocean Brands, a brand company that owns the brands Oceans, Tuna, and Goldseal.
And Goldseal, that's what really threw me off when I started researching you is Oceans, obviously, I've heard of Oceans. I've been eating it my entire life.
Right.
Canned fish from Oceans, but I've also been eating Goldseal my entire life.
I grew up on it too.
I didn't know it was the same. We'll get there. Let's start from the beginning. How did you end up here first and foremost?
Yeah, so in October of last year, I had my president from the Overweighty Food Group, Daryl Jones, ask me if I was interested in potentially coming over to Ocean Brands as part of their succession plan to long-term opportunity to lead the business. And it's a fishing company, and they deal in fish, and these are the brands. And if you think it's something you'd like to do, give it some thought and let me know, and I'll pass it on to the right people. And so, full disclosure here, Ocean Brands is a part of the Jim Pattison Group, just as Overweighty Food Group is.
I figured it might be. I was going to ask you, because he owns all the licenses, I thought.
No.
Well, see, and this is why we're doing this podcast. Let's just paint the picture for the listener. So I get this email from this humble man a couple days ago, and he says, "Can't believe we haven't run into each other. I listened to your show. Some interesting stuff. Would love to be a guest on the show to talk about conservation." And my response was short, but to the point of, what are your credentials? What do you stand for? Right. And then I get this email, because I love explaining this to the listener. Then I get this email back with a very detailed description from Ian Ricketts, who's the vice president of Ocean Brand. And also an article that was recently run in the paper about this fascinating forward thinking that we're about to talk about in just a minute. But the reason why I'm really laying this out for the listeners, I've really only had, when did we decide we were going to do this? Yesterday?
Yeah.
I've had 24 hours on the internet.
Right.
While trying to pack for a trip to be like, oh my God, what do they do? What's going on in the tuna industry?
Right.
What are the standards? But then in my head when I was driving here, I was like, wait a second. They do all of their fishing offshore, like closer to Australia, which we'll talk about later. They don't actually do the fishing here close to Vancouver. And then I was like, well, Jimmy Pattison owns all the fishing licenses. Is that tuna? Is that salmon? Straighten me up here.
Yeah. So on the salmon side, which I probably won't spend much time on.
Because is the Goldseal salmon a salmon that's harvested closer to home?
Yes, the Goldseal salmon, as is most salmon commercially that you see sold in supermarkets, both fresh, frozen, and canned. The majority of it all comes out of Bristol Bay, Alaska.
Yeah,
and it's a very well managed fishery. I've only been observing it, of course, for the last 9 months, but I'm very impressed by what Alaska Fish and Game is doing, as well as Washington University. They play a big part in it. Some pretty smart people, and they've been very proactive in how they're managing the fishery. I can't say that I've seen any other fishery managed as well.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
For Alaska. And just for clarity, non-residents of the U.S. can't hold those licenses.
Oh, okay. So it's not like we're stealing all the...
It's a U.S. resident has to hold the license.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Pattison does not own those licenses?
No, that's not correct.
Does he own any fishing licenses?
I don't know. I don't have those details.
I do. Jimmy on the show.
Yeah. And I try not to speak for Jimmy.
Of course, no. And please don't speak for Jimmy. But that's okay. Let's move forward. So lead me through how this comes into tuna, because that's really where your expertise is.
Right.
Let's focus on that.
So when I came on board, you do a size up of the company that you're looking at becoming a part of, and there's a lot of things you look at. I came from a company that had very, very sound values of giving back, of being responsible with customers, and having a very positive public image. And they were great to work for. They've done a tremendous job giving back to the communities, and they really have a very rich history in the West in all the communities. I needed to feel comfortable about where this business was going, and to get a good feeling for what's important. And it was really easy to see early on that there were some efforts to focus on the long-term sustainability of this tuna industry and our oceans, including salmon. And where that showed up for me was little things like in 2012, they were founding members of the Poland Line, of the International Poland Line, and that meant that they were making it possible to bring tuna to the market that was caught the most sustainable way that you can catch tuna.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I looked up Poland Line.
For sure.
And I expected to see a guy out there with a Shimano rod and a Penn reel.
Right.
And I saw like an actual pole, it looked like a stick.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming line.
Yeah.
I didn't see any reels.
Line.
Was I seeing that right?
It's like 10 carat.
It is, right?
It is.
Can you just but when we're saying Poland Line, because I'm assuming there's other people out there who don't know this.
Right.
Like I did not know this. Can you just explain exactly what the process is?
Sure. So one thing we'll get into is the problem of bycatch. If you're a fisherman and you fish any coastal waters, you understand what bycatch is from a commercial fishing effort. And in tuna fishing, certain methods produce a high degree of bycatch. Poland line is on the far end of the spectrum of being the most responsible way to catch tuna, because the bycatch is literally zero. And the way it becomes zero is that they use methods and gear. Poland line, a single person with a pole
Right.
and a line and a special hook that actually doesn't barb or go into the fish. It just catches the fish enough that if tension is kept on it, they can lift it up and pull it over their shoulder and into the boat and into a hold.
Is that the circle hooks you're speaking of?
No, that's not circle hooks. That's a special type of hook that they use just for pole and line.
Okay.
But essentially, you don't want the fish to stay on the hook. You want to be able to lift them, have them take the bait that you have on there, lift them out of the water, and just the inertia of them moving. It's kind of like having catching a fish. We've all caught a small trout that's too small and set the hook, and it sometimes flies behind you.
Because when I looked at the article that was written, I saw the photo of the guy's pole and lining, and a tuna kind of midair.
Yes.
And I thought, that's very strange. Because I do a lot of tuna fishing in Australia.
Yeah.
They can't stop moving, right?
You're right. They don't stop moving. They're machines when it comes to eating. They're predators, right?
Yeah.
And they grow really fast.
Right.
They're very resilient, so I think they're pretty hyper.
So do they just kind of, as you're pole and lining and hoisting them in, they must just kind of shake off and
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You're just relieving a bit of the tension, and they come off the hook, and back to you go to fishing.
Are there weights?
No, well, there's the weight of the hook, but it's mostly happening right at the surface. So, they have a technique of bringing the boat out to an area where they'll see bait ball or they'll see fish feeding. They use binoculars a lot of times for this.
Look for birds.
Look for birds, exactly, just what we would do. Mm-hmm. And bring the boat out to the area. They'll start fishing on it, and they'll use water jets off the boat to sort of distract the fish, and it kind of adds to the feeling of there's speed and chaos and keeps the fish interested.
Right.
And of course you've got, maybe 25, 30 people off the bow of a boat, throwing their lines and, flicking these fish into the boat. And the wonderful thing about it is that it doesn't catch the traditional bycatch of things like turtles or sharks or juvenile fish, because the hooks are such a size that the juvenile fish don't get caught.
But why are and just excuse me here, I'm so excited talking about this because I've experienced this. And I know what it's like. The water is white. There's bait everywhere. There's scales everywhere. The birds are going crazy. But usually those tuna are eating little fish. Why are they just taking the hooks?
Because
they're shiny?
The hooks have little fish bait on them.
Okay, so they are baited.
Yes.
They're baited hooks.
Sometimes imitations too.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, it's impossible to catch a shark or a turtle like that.
Well, it doesn't happen.
Historically, did they throw nets for tuna?
So there's different ways of catching tuna. Now, pole and line tuna is a very responsible way of catching fish, and we sell pole and line tuna under Ocean brands, under Oceans. Unfortunately, there are not enough people fishing that way, and it is not as affordable as regularly caught tuna.
Because it takes more labor, obviously.
Yes, it takes more labor. And so we have to strike a balance. When pole and line was introduced roughly in around 2012 to the market, we were the first to bring pole and line. We watched it carefully.
But how many hundreds of years were they doing pole and line?
Pole and line goes back years and years and years.
It would have had to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that when we start talking about fads. But introducing pole and line to the Canadian consumer was great, and it was viewed largely as introducing a few sustainable or responsibly caught types of tuna to meet the needs, almost the lifestyle needs of a few consumers that were really picky about how their food is sourced.
Yeah, like this one right here.
Right.
We're not talking bluefin. We're not talking the thousands of dollars for the Japanese market. We're talking what kind?
This is skipjack that we're talking about. And, skipjack, like Canadians love their tuna. They eat $198 million worth of it a year.
No way, seriously?
Oh, they love their tuna.
Huh.
So what we believe is that it's no longer acceptable to have a few types of responsibly caught tuna in the category to meet the lifestyle needs of a few people, but that all tuna should be responsibly caught. And I'll get into the methods, but the reality is this. If the grocer says, well, I got to wait till consumers want to buy it. So what we're saying is that we have to educate 35 million people. By the time we get that done, the fishery will be finished. On the legislation side, well, we know that government is not able to completely protect the fishery.
But how does our government's not even part of this because the fishing's being done
right
elsewhere?
There's different government bodies that manage the fisheries in the West Central Pacific, but you're dealing with managing around 80 country flags and how they fish. So it's very difficult to think of the possibility of us legislating a certain way of fishing. It's up to the packers, the brands, and the retailers to decide that this is the right thing to do.
I was going to hit you up about that later, but in reading your email twice and then reading the article, the big red flags that were waving in my head were, you guys need to get the retailers on board and just basically have it so that they only carry, because the consumer will hop on board after they understand that the retailers have hopped on board. Does that sound right?
It's a bit of chicken and egg.
Yeah.
It's a bit of chicken and egg. In fairness, the retailers are actually getting more and more on board. But the consumer now has a choice. They can choose a responsibly caught product or one that's not responsibly caught, but they don't know necessarily what the difference is. Okay. And the default response is usually whatever's the cheapest in the category.
So let's break that down now. Talk to me about before 2012. Tell me the history of commercially harvested tuna.
So tuna traditionally, aside from some island communities fishing pole and line, and some small purse seines are caught using a purse seine net, which is acceptable. But what makes it damaging is that the fishing is occurring on what's called a FAD, a fish aggregation device. So kind of like we'd fish on a lake and we'd look for structure, and we know there's going to be trout around there. This is the same principle on an industrial scale. Attach sonar to it so that you can, from miles away, determine, how many tons of fish are around it and whether you should go over and fish on that FAD. And the problem is that the FADs, because they create a little ecosystem of, habitat, they attract everything. And the result is too much bycatch to be sustainable for the ocean.
If you were netting underneath them.
If you're netting on a FAD.
Okay, yeah, that just sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, so bycatch, the amount of fish caught non-targeted species, is upwards of 10%. Now, it's not always 10%. Sometimes it might be higher, but the studies, not my studies, but scientific studies, say that it hovers around that 8%. Ugh. And pole and line fishing is roughly zero. Now, the missing piece is something in the middle, something that is very responsible, that almost reduces the bycatch to pole and line, but that makes the tuna responsibly caught, but also affordable. So, so it meets the needs of all the consumers, not just ones that have the ability and means to pay for a bit more for tuna. So what we've chosen to do over the last 10 years is work with fishermen to change how they fish. We're changing how they fish, we're changing the gear they use, and the way that we've achieved that is working with NGOs like the Nature Conservatory, primarily with Greenpeace, with Pole and Line Federation, and others, World Wildlife Fund, to change how they fish.
When you say they, are you talking mostly people from Thailand? Where are most of your anglers coming from?
Your island fishermen, your fishermen come from everywhere. They have rules and regulations that they have to follow, but they come from a lot of different flagged countries. And our objective here was to change how they fish. So what we did was we worked with Greenpeace to find acceptable methods that are research-backed to reduce bycatch. So what we use is a method called fad-free fishing. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's the same as pole and line. You're going out and you're looking for a ball of fish that are feeding on bait, getting out the binoculars, racing over, and while adult, mature, harvestable tuna are feeding, you're catching them using a small purse seine net, but you're not catching all the bycatch that would be attracted. So it's harder to catch those fish because you've got to find them. It's like hunting. You've actually got to go find these fish. And then you need to, catch them. And you don't know how big a mass of fish is there. So, the efforts are a lot harder. But the result is that the bycatch from fishing fad-free, or what we call free swimming or free school, is less than 1%.
Okay, and this is where I got lost in the email. You guys are using the net on free swimmers.
Right.
Not using pole and line on free swimmers.
We use both.
Okay, because that was where I got lost. When I was reading the email, I thought, well, why not just, because I'm very familiar with fads.
Yeah, why not just pull and line fish?
Well, why not just pull and line fish with the fad? Is where I was at, because couldn't, and I know that it was glaringly obvious why there's an answer here,
Right.
but I couldn't find it. Because
Right.
I guess maybe I'm biased because I do so much fad fishing myself in Australia.
Yeah. So you have some experience, and you're bang on. So pole line fishermen will often fish on what's called an anchored fad. So if you go back to the way that the island fishermen used to fish for sustenance, they would actually build little rafts and stuff just off the edge of the island so they could go fish around it, catch their fish, go home and feed their families. This is essentially the same thing, but they're anchored. The commercial fishing I'm referring to, which is fishing on fads, they're drifting fads. They have markers on them, and you can pick up where they are, and you can buzz over to this one and fish off of it and catch your fish, but also your bycatch, and you can go over to this one, and they're introduced illegally and legally into the Pacific Ocean. So Greenpeace pulls a lot of them out of the water.
Oh, because it's basically just litter. So we're not talking the fads I'm used to.
No.
Or like we use the big tankers as fads. They're enormous fads.
Well, anything in the water creates a fad. Like if you have a boat in the water.
There's a log in the water, it's a fad.
It's
technically,
fad.
Yeah.
Technically it is, yeah. So there's a lot of different discussion around what's a fad and what's a good fad versus a bad fad. And so when we talk about fad-free fishing, we're really talking about the purse seine fishery and fishing on fads or not on fads. Mm-hmm. And the wonderful thing is that we're learning that using the purse seine fishing method allows the fishermen to earn a living and also fish responsibly because we're getting bycatch that's well below 1%.
How many feet is it penetrating in the water when you're using a purse seine net?
It's a good question. I honestly don't have the answer to that yet. Again, being 8 months in, I'm working with Greenpeace regularly, and of course our team's here, and I don't have the answer to that.
That's okay, we'll get it.
But yeah,
why not the bycatch? Because I'm just thinking when I've seen tuna bait balls, there's always other fish underneath feasting on the tuna.
Yeah.
So how are the purse seines? What is a purse seine net? Is it a net with? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering how it doesn't get bycatch in it.
Well, the bycatch is reduced to
1%.
Less than 1%.
Yes.
So what it really does is that the fad attracts sharks and other sea turtles and mammals and that.
Okay, so you don't have the problem of as many species because you just don't have the fad there.
Right.
You're not going to get a marlin and a...
Yeah, so what we have is we have observers, third-party observers, that we pay for, that are certified. They're not tied to the fishery on every one of our boats.
Really?
To make sure that the fishing is done correctly, and they're observing what bycatch is, how bad it is it falling under the 1%, are they fishing away from the fads that they're not supposed to be near. Yeah, so we work with an association, a third party that's globally recognized and recognized by Greenpeace as well, to be on all of those vessels, 100% coverage.
Coming up, Ian and I continue our discussion about the industry and its practices. Again, don't miss out on Flygal's sale at www.flygal.ca. Between the 25% off code and the American conversion, you could be saving close to 50%. Just enter code SHOP25, that's SHOP25 at checkout. We don't expect items to last much longer. I've got to throw some random questions at you. How many cans of tuna can one tuna make? Sounds like the beginning of a tongue twister.
Wow, well...
Because what do they average? They average a couple feet long?
Yeah, 3 feet, 2 feet to 3 feet.
So how many cans of tuna do you think you get out of one fish?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Are they specific about what parts of the fish go into it?
Yeah, I think there's about, when you take off, the non-edible parts of a fish, just like you would a salmon. I think in a tuna's case, you're getting recovery of around, I think it's around 60%.
Okay, what happens to the other 40%?
Certain byproducts are used to make different products.
Oh,
that occurs in the salmon fishery too.
Pet food, where would it go?
It's a great question. I don't know exactly where all of it goes, but I know, there's oils that are made.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd be curious to see where that goes. I'm sure they have a use for it. There's a use for it.
Yeah, the tuna fishery, those factories that produce that are very efficient. There's not much that goes to waste, right? I mean, they have, bones are going into, a lot of it is going into vitamins and minerals and things of that nature that I've seen.
I would have gone into this interview
Fish oils.
really skeptical, but because my husband works in chickens, we work in chicken factories, so I know that a lot of the rest of the bird is used, and I'm sure tuna would be the same way.
Yeah, recovery is pretty important.
More questions. How many workers per boat do you have? You said at some point there's 15 or 16 on the bow of the boat?
Well,
they're pole and line.
On a pole and line boat, I've seen, where you have 20. It's pretty impressive to watch. I mean,
how many for the seiners? Because it must be cutting the cost down substantially.
Yeah, seiners, you're dealing with, there's got to be like a dozen people on the boat. I don't know the exact number, but it's certainly not as beneficial from a social standpoint as it would be for pole and line, because you're hiring a lot more people in that sense. And then of course you still have the laborers back at the factory, which you would have in any case for the canning, right?
Now they do all the processing there, I'm assuming.
Quite often fish are frozen and collected and tracked, and everything's ID'd. Everything has, you can trace a fish right back to the boat it was caught and where it was caught. Each
individual fish?
Every can of tuna.
Where are the serial numbers on this thing?
Yeah, so there's numbers on every can of tuna.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they trace back to exactly where it was caught, when it was caught, the boat it was caught on.
Hold on. Too much information. Walk me through this. So Joe Blow, our guy from Thailand, goes out. He's going out fishing today. Tell me this tuna's life. This tuna bites the hook.
Right.
Gets thrown in the boat.
Right.
It's been caught by your Thai guy.
Right.
Excellent. It gets back to the factory. Is this one processed there or is it frozen?
Well, fish are depends on the type of fishing. So if it's a pull and line, it's quite often a day catch, like it's gone out that day, come back that day, or next day kind of thing. You need to get fish back. I mean, preserving the quality of the fish is really important.
Yeah.
You have other boats that have the ability to hold them at a colder temperature for a little bit longer. And
so this is a loaded question because it's totally dependent on the fisherman.
Right.
Okay, so say that it's going back to a factory in Thailand.
Yes.
So it gets processed.
Right.
Obviously, the factories employ people, so there's work here.
Yep.
It's brined in either water or oil, I'm assuming?
Mostly water.
Okay, and then it gets canned. Where's this? Is it stamped? Is it like an expiration stamp kind of thing?
Yeah, so I've been in all of our canneries, and the ones that we buy from. We don't own them. We tell them how we want the product canned. We provide the spec for how we want the fish treated, handled, cleaned, recorded, that sort of thing. So the fish are caught. They're brought in. They go into into the factory where they're processed and they're graded like anything else would be, and then they are cleaned. And there's different stages of cleaning, just like you would imagine.
Sounds like chickens.
It's probably very similar. And, the quality is very important to manage. And, of course, different countries and different regions have different quality standards. So there's hundreds of differences of spec on how these fish are cleaned. For instance, albacore that comes to Canada is double cleaned. It's the whitest, most beautiful albacore that you'll find. And if you were to buy that same albacore in the U.S., you'll find that it's not nearly as good.
Because of the Canadian standards when they purchase it.
Yeah.
Why albacore over skipjack?
Actually, the standard for skipjack in the U.S. is quite a bit different too than ours. The standard in the U.S., if you're to buy skipjack, it's almost like soup. It's really watery.
What? Well, are our skipjack in Canada, are they also double washed?
The double cleaning is referenced to albacore.
Okay.
Skipjack itself is cleaned almost the same way. But what's interesting about tuna is that there's different colors of meat in every fish. So they will grade them as they're cleaning them, and the Canadian spec will have a certain color and certain quality to it. A lot of the really dark tuna goes to the Middle East. That's what they prefer. Canadians love their white albacore tuna, and it's like double cleaned white, and then the darker meat would go to a different country. So there's no waste. It's
distributed differently.
Right. So if you go to the U.S. today and open up a can of albacore, it won't be as white as ours. Right. And if you open up the skipjack anywhere in the U.S., it'll be really watery. It's almost like soup in a can, tuna soup.
I mean, is it a price thing?
Yeah. The U.S. consumers actually reduce their tuna consumption because they're not happy with the quality. And any of the growth occurring in the U.S. right now is coming from the premium end of tuna in skipjack, good quality skipjack, and good quality albacore.
Because you said our number is 190 what?
About $198 million worth of tuna is purchased by Canadians every year.
And in America, do you know those numbers?
I don't, but, to give you an idea...
It's hard because of the population difference, too, though.
Yeah, so to give you an idea, Canada represents about under 5% of all the tuna consumption in the world.
Well, in all my travels, it's funny. I mean, even in Sri Lanka, there's tuna everywhere. You go to Bali, there's tuna everywhere.
Well, tuna is a very important fish for the world.
It really is, yeah.
It's a very important fish for a lot of countries for their diet. Some of their diets are made up by 40% fish. Tuna is very, very important, and that's why I'm wanting to talk about this. When Greenpeace had its tuna ranking come out a few weeks ago, and ocean brand tuna moved up to 4th from its 9th position based on some of the work we've done. And the 3 brands ahead of us were, I would call them born green, if you will. Mm-hmm. They're small niche brands. They're doing, they're really, really good companies. They've just taken a position of only doing their pull and line, and that makes them quite niche in that respect. But I had somebody ask me, you've moved from 9th to 4th. That's really good. What are you doing to get to number 1? And I provided a polite answer, but the reality is this is not about becoming number 1 on somebody's list. Greenpeace is going to continue to raise the bar, and it's not about just meeting, that bar. This is a lot bigger. By 2050, the population of this earth is going to move from 7.3 billion to 9.3. And based on current demand, our fisheries, our oceans, will not be able to sustain it. The numbers are, we will need 3 oceans to meet our needs. And bycatch is such a huge waste. What we're doing here is trying to change the way Canadian consumers buy tuna. We want them to understand that there's choice in the category, and that the choices they make, one by one, change the way tuna is caught on the other side of the world. And I know you've had this conversation with others, but it comes up, of course, my few cans of tuna, what does that change? I can tell you that Canada globally is seen as a leading country. We're regarded very highly in many nations. And as a matter of fact, many of the canneries in different parts of the world would love nothing more than to say that they pack tuna for the Canadian consumer. So when the Canadian consumer demands a responsibly caught tuna and they start making choices, it changes how tuna is caught.
This is so cool. Because I will be honest with you, especially when I was in my 20s, I ate a lot of tuna. To me, it was like tuna's tuna. I used to avoid buying oceans because you guys were so beautiful, but you guys were the name brand.
Right.
So I'd go for the non-name brand because it was 99 cents a can.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the price difference. You guys average what per can now?
Yeah. So, look, we don't control the retail price that the grocery stores put on our tuna. What we control is our cost and what we ask for. We pay fishermen about 3 to 5 cents more a can to fish the way we want them to fish.
Which I know adds up. 3 to 5 cents is huge.
It's huge.
Wow. Okay.
It's the biggest commitment that Ocean Brands has made, and we're doing it because we think long term this is the right thing to do. The company's been around for quite a while, and you and I are going to be here in 2050, and we're going to be here to see where we're at and how well we've looked after this. So we believe in a long-term view of business, and that means we need to look ahead, and we know for a fact that what we're doing is the right thing to do. And we'll continue to look at different types of fishing methods that continually move us closer and closer to zero bycatch. And we'll work with NGOs to be able to do that. We'll increase the amount of pole and line fishing we'll do, of course, as much as we possibly can. Just a matter of fact, there isn't enough pole line fishing going on. There aren't enough people doing it to actually meet the needs. So we continue to look for ways to grow that, and we work with partners that are expanding those fisheries. So this is really important. This is not about being a little higher on somebody's list. This is about making sure that we're taking care of the ocean, and this is a small part. Australia is already there. So John West took the lead in Australia. So we work with John West.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like your peer network, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, we're working on this. You're working on this. What are you learning? And we absolutely share, key learnings. And so we work closely with other brands and companies that are on the same path. So Australia is there. And actually, I won't disclose one of the brands there, but one of the brands there just recently made the change. They made the commitment last month under a lot of pressure to finally, switch over. So now Australia is pretty much 100% fishing fad-free.
Pressure by whom?
NGOs.
Okay. I've got some questions for you about business before I dive into how you're going to do this marketing-wise. From a business stance, you say that you work with a factory.
Right.
And they're a supplier for other companies.
Right.
Okay. So how do you make sure that the tuna that are being caught for you are being caught responsibly when, for all you know, they're selling to Joe Blow Tuna Cup Factory?
Right. That's a great question.
With dynamite.
Yeah. And that's a great question. So traceability in the tuna industry is utmost important.
Sounds like that. You really got me with this stamping cans. And it doesn't sound like you're just stamping cans. It sounds like you're stamping fish.
Well, when a fish is caught and, you have to hold them, so you hold them like you would a salmon or anything like that. You've got a tote that you would store them in, it's like a bit of a container, and they hold, maybe it's 500 pounds of fish. And that tote is ID'd from the boat that it came from the captain that was on the boat, the date that it was caught, and that tag becomes part of the ID. And then as it moves along, it gathers more information, where it's processed, the line it was processed on, all of the detail. So when we receive our shipments, we have inspection that occurs at where it's being packed. An inspection is just to ensure that there's a lot of technical stuff that's met first, and then we do inspection here as well. But we record and we track every can code before it's even left port where it's being packed, and that goes into our system. It arrives, we reconcile with it, we know that we have that product. We within 3 minutes we can trace any can in Canada where it's at.
Wow. Okay.
Right, so that's that you're getting into food safety now, but within 3 minutes we can track where a product is in Canada.
Oh my goodness, this is incredible. But say that they're selling to 5 companies, or there's 5 main brands,
right?
And you guys are the only ones who are doing this responsibly, but you're paying them an extra 3 to 5 cents,
right?
You got somebody on board, so you're making sure that it's being done as it should be, right?
So a third party is on board. Bureau Veritas is the company that we use.
Okay, great. Is there a way to somehow make the system so manageable that the other 4 companies can also jump on board this sustainable technique?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you asked that, because this is not a marketing stunt for Oceans to sell more tuna. This is a movement to change how people purchase fish for Canada, and how the consumer buys it. We want all of the brands to be moving over to this.
Yeah.
That's really important. It's really important. Now, there are some that are making the move over. Not enough, but we're getting close. We need to have everybody move over, though. We need to be Australia or New Zealand or Germany, where fad caught fish with all that bycatch doesn't exist anymore. What the consumer can do today to help move that is to look for tuna in the category that is clearly marked how it's caught. Because all tuna that's responsibly caught is supposed to identify how it's caught.
Okay.
So right on the label, if you look, and not in, mice type font, you will actually see pull and line or free swimming.
Okay, so free swimming means no fads.
That's right.
See, and I always just thought free swimming was a marketing stunt. And I was like, well, no shit, it's free swimming. Everything's free swimming.
I
This
know.
is totally different.
I know, the jargon is difficult. It's complex. So, how do you communicate that to consumers? And free school is often referred to it. It's sort of a similar name. And then we also have a brand or one of our products that is called Circle Hook Caught.
Right. Yeah. What's that all about?
So Circle Hook is referring to a different fish method, which is long lining. And long lining is basically putting a big tether out with a lot of little lines that come off of it in a single hook.
Last I checked, that was highly frowned upon.
Right.
Why?
Couple things. There's ways to mitigate bycatch with that method, which I'll get into, and that's the circle hook. So when you lay that line out, there's a couple of things you have to be careful of. You need to be fishing below the surface because of seabirds.
Of course. Yeah, and they
Right?
will take.
I mean...
hooking one of those makes my stomach upset.
Right.
Let alone hooking 50 of them down the line.
Right, and from casting, in the salt that you're always on the lookout for birds, and you're on the lookout for turtles too, right? Mm-hmm. They come up fast, and all of a sudden you got to stop fishing.
Yeah.
So the long line needs to be at the right level so that the birds can't get it. You also want to be long line fishing in areas where there is no breeding of anything going on. You don't want mammals breeding in the area because they're going to be in the surface area of the water. So you have to be careful with that. You're looking to be in certain zones at certain times of the year. Quite often long lining is done at night too, because that's when you don't have birds flying around as much and there's less activity, in the surface area of the water. So the biggest difference though to reducing bycatch in a long line, and it's reducing it dramatically, is the use of a circle hook. And a circle hook is, if you think of a J hook, most hooks come out of Japan, and it's a standard hook, has a barb. A J hook actually tips over at the point and curves back to the shank and then down. And what that does is, there's fish bait on all of those hooks, is it allows non-targeted species, if they approach that, to be able to rip that off and not get hooked up. And there's been a lot of studies by the WWF, World Wildlife Fund, to really measure the effectiveness of this. Like, is it working or is it not working? And they're saying it's working. It's actually dramatically reducing bycatch. So
how come the tuna get hooked?
It's a great question. I think it really comes down to, the size of the tuna, the size of the hook. The net result is bycatch is reduced. I haven't actually, in 8 months been able to see it for myself firsthand. But, we've had good discussions with Greenpeace on it, and WWF is endorsing it. And they're leaders. I mean, they're working with John West. They're working with others. I mean, it's science-based results. I'm sure as I spend more time.
Yeah, I can't believe you've only been here 8 months.
Yeah, well, big steep learning curve. When you care about fish, I grew up fishing, and it's close to my heart. I've never killed a steelhead. I'm keeping my fish wet now, and
good.
It just makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. We have to evolve.
We have to, and I'm going to ask you about that. But I have another question about tuna.
Sure.
Sorry, it's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Cans of tuna and cost.
Yeah.
I understand, we don't need to dive into exact numbers, but
Sure.
when you look at buying an ocean, I'm just speaking to the consumer now, and myself included.
Yeah.
In buying one of your cans of tuna in Save On Foods,
Sure.
what am I looking at to pay for a can of tuna?
A can of skipjack is going to, on a regular price, you're probably going to see it around $179, somewhere in there.
Still really affordable. And then what about the cheaper, the non-ethical brands? How much are they selling for?
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of them very heavily advertised, in between, 88 and 99. That 99 price point, it's the threshold. It's the, once you break that line, you lose a large group of the consumers because, it's a big threshold to cross.
I thought I was paying for the brand, 110%. I always just thought I was paying for the well-known brand. I had no idea that there was so much into it. Yeah, so for an extra 70 cents, you could... Well,
when I say 99, I'm saying on special.
Oh, okay.
There's other brands out there that at a regular price are, a parity with ours. In some channels, we call channels, grocery channels, we're cheaper. In some channels, we're actually cheaper by 20 cents.
Okay, got it. And there's so many variables. I won't pick your brain about that.
Yeah, and we don't control what retailers do. No. No, we don't. We think it's right to pay a little bit more to have fish caught this way. We also think it's right that everybody does.
It really is just a little bit more.
That's the reality here. April, is we're trying to create a movement in Canada where it's no longer acceptable to buy tuna that's not responsibly caught. It's just the time has come. It's Canada's time.
Why don't they just add 5 cents on to when they're selling it to the retailer, and retailers add 5 cents on when they sell it to the consumer?
Yeah.
I mean, even in Bali and Sri Lanka, 5 cents is not much.
Right. Well, I think the short answer to that is, you may not know this, the listeners may not know this, but the Canadian grocery industry is one of the most competitive grocery industries in the world. It is certainly more competitive than the U.S.
Really? I did not know that. No.
Yeah, it actually is. I mean, you've seen Target come into Canada and have a tough time, maybe for other reasons, but the reality is that this is not an attractive market to come into for U.S. retailers. It's very, very hard, and we're very spread out. The cost of distribution is high. The growth of our country is not really, really high. You have European retailers coming in like Aldi, Lidl, and Walmart is turning up the heat. You've also got the big elephant in the room is Amazon.
Oh, that's right.
Amazon just bought Whole Foods.
That is right. I just sat next to a guy in an airplane. We spoke about this for 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the grocery industry is going through a very disruptive period right now, and the retailers are all looking to look at their future and make
lower costs.
Right. So
5 cents matters when it's $1.70 or when it's 99 cents.
Right.
Damn. Okay.
Right. So the consumer plays a bigger part here. There are companies like John West and ourselves that are bringing these responsibly caught products to the market. And in order for the inertia of what our efforts to grow and to eventually get it to the point where, it's the way tuna is bought and caught, we need a movement. We need a movement of Canadians willing to say, you know what, that's important.
What about your marketing? Do you guys do television?
We do marketing. From observing marketing today on sustainability, one of the things that's interesting, it's a bit of a paradox, is that if you're paying 5 cents more a can, you probably have less to advertise.
That's true. Yeah.
Right.
What about sending out a camera, just a down-to-earth, organic, raw, 10-minute YouTube clip from the guy on the boat, the third party on the boat?
Right. So I think that's where you got to go, and obviously social media is a very powerful tool today.
Totally.
And traditional marketing.
I tried finding you guys on social. Did I miss something? Are you on there?
Yeah, it's a little hidden, right? It's I think. At the inception of this organization at the time, on the internet and everything, I think they picked up a different URL, and so instead of it being under Ocean Brands, you would have to look at Ocean's Tuna.
Okay, got it.
And or Ocean Seafood.
Do you guys sell in the States?
We don't.
This is just in Canada.
It's in Canada only.
This is incredible. I had no idea. Well, I give you my word that from now on I will buy my tuna through you guys when I'm here, and through John West when I'm in Australia.
Yeah.
And what are your plans for the next, you've only been here less than a year.
Right.
Do you have a grand scheme? You're still really young. Technically there's so much room for you to grow.
Right. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Our plan, from a responsible side of the business, we've done a lot, but we've still got a lot of work to do. I want to be clear on that. We have a lot of work to do. Some key things we're looking at doing is working with our albacore fishery to really get good intelligence on any bycatch that's occurring there and look for ways to mitigate it, working with the NGOs. We are looking to increase the amount of pole and line we put into the market. And, of course, we're looking to communicate to all of our Canadian consumers just how important it is and what opportunity they have to help make this shift. And I'd really like to see us, by the end of 2018 to be exactly where Australia is. There's just a zero tolerance for purchasing tuna that isn't responsibly caught. Consumers can also consult the Greenpeace 2017 tuna audit. And, that way they're getting it firsthand from an NGO that, that they can ask questions to. We advise them to do that. So when they're in the category, look for those key phrases of free swimming, free school, pull and line, or soaker hook caught. And if you don't see that on the can, then you don't want to buy it.
I want to see it stamped in enormous letters on top of every can from now on.
Right. I understand. That's a stick. That's a sticker.
There's another 5 cents a can.
Well, and it's not necessarily as sustainable, right? You're adding more packaging.
No, I'm kidding.
I know.
But it would be nice to have it really, really clear, because I know myself and others, we just look at the price below it.
I know.
Because tuna's just always been tuna to me.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Anymore. If you stop and think about it, we're talking 3 to 5 cents a can, and quite often a can of tuna is cheaper than a chocolate bar. Right? So we just need to change that habit. As far as the business goes and expanding and some of our plans, I'm glad you asked. We are really looking hard at adding other brands to the business that are built on a foundation of providing Canadians with really good, wholesome, responsibly sourced, grown products. And so we're on the lookout right now. And we have actually put somebody in place full-time to look for these small companies that are local and are looking for a hand. They've built their business to a point where they know that they maybe could use a little help. So we'd like to be able to participate in that. And, we see that Ocean Brands becoming a bit of a house for a lot of really cool brands that are making sure that we're providing good, wholesome food to Canadians in a sustainable way.
And that concludes this episode of Anchored. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave a review about Anchored online.